The first thing I remember from that night isn't her face or the betrayal. It's the sound of the clock. Each tick felt like it was mocking me, counting down to the moment my world would split in half. I wasn't even supposed to be home. I wasn't supposed to hear the muffled laughter coming from behind the half-open door, or see the kind of smile she used to give me, now aimed at someone else. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the door. I just walked away, as if my body knew what to do before my brain caught up. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely start the car. I remember the streetlights blurring into one long smear of orange as I drove. No destination, no plan, just pure instinct to escape. It was like I'd been ripped out of my own life and dropped into some alternate reality where nothing made sense anymore. That night, I left my phone on the passenger seat, screen lighting up with her name again and again, and I couldn't bear to look at it. I drove past the city, past the suburbs, into the dark stretches of road where the only company I had was the radio static. Somewhere along the way, I turned it off and just listened to the engine hum, like a lullaby for someone who didn't know who they were anymore. I didn't stop until I reached a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. I sat there until dawn, nursing a cold cup of coffee, staring at the peeling wallpaper. Nobody asked why I looked like I'd just crawled out of a wreck. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they knew. That was the night I disappeared. I didn't go back for my clothes, my photos, nothing. I became someone else, a ghost wandering between cheap motels and roadside diners, a man who left everything behind because facing her, and the truth, was unbearable. And for a whole year, I thought I'd erased her from my life, until the day she walked back in and said something I could never have imagined hearing. The first few weeks after I vanished were like living inside a fog. I didn't use my real name anywhere I went. I started telling people my name was Eli, a name I pulled from some forgotten memory just to have something to answer to when someone asked. I sold my wedding ring for a couple $100 at a pawn shop on the edge of nowhere. Watching the guy behind the counter slide it into a plastic bin felt like watching the last piece of my old life disappear. It wasn't just the ring. It was my dignity, my sense of who I was. I drifted from town to town, sleeping in my car when I had to, eating greasy diner food, and trying not to think about her, about Lillian and the stranger in our home. But the problem is, silence can get too loud. The nights were the worst. I'd lay in bed, staring at cracked motel ceilings, and imagine what she was doing. Was she with him? Was she even thinking about me? Every time my mind went there, I'd get up and just drive, no matter the hour. Gas stations, empty highways, truck stops, they all became my world. Then something strange started happening. I began meeting people who, in their own way, were just as broken as I was. There was an older man named Harold, who I met in a 24-hour diner at 3 a.m. He saw me sitting alone, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and without asking, he sat across from me. "You look like a man who just lost a war," he said. I didn't even argue. He told me stories about his own divorce, about how betrayal has a way of turning you into someone unrecognizable. He called it the slow death of trust. Harold wasn't the only one. I started collecting these strange encounters, almost like fate was throwing people in my path who knew exactly what kind of hell I was living. A waitress in New Mexico told me, "Sometimes you have to burn down everything before you can see what's left of you." I remember those words because, at the time, I was still too scared to even look at what was left of me. For months, I avoided any place that reminded me of home. I didn't contact my family or my friends. I lived like a ghost, convincing myself that disappearing was the only way to survive. And maybe it was. But every time I thought I was finally free of her shadow, I'd dream about her, about the way she looked at me before everything went wrong. What I didn't know was that she was looking for me. I didn't know that one day, she'd find me and say something that would change everything I thought I knew about that night of betrayal. By the time 6 months had passed, I had become someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't the man who used to sit at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee waiting for her to wake up. I wasn't the man who used to plan vacations and dream about buying a small house by the lake. I was just drifting, like a ghost, nameless, invisible. Every town looked the same. Every road stretched into nothing. The only things that reminded me I was alive were the nightmares that came every few nights, dragging me back into that room, forcing me to watch her smile at someone else the way she used to smile at me. Then, one night in a rundown bar on the edge of Colorado, something happened that rattled me to my core. I was sitting alone at the counter, nursing a cheap beer, when a man sat down next to me. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a face that looked like it had been through a lifetime of bad choices. Without saying a word, he reached into his coat pocket and slid a photograph across the bar. I didn't want to look at it, but my curiosity won. It was her, Lillian. She looked almost the same, except her hair was shorter, and there was something different in her eyes, like fear. Behind her, in the blurred background of the photo, was a car I didn't recognize, with a man leaning against it. My stomach tightened like a fist. The stranger looked at me with an expression that was impossible to read. "She's looking for you," he said, his voice rough like gravel. "But not for the reason you think." I couldn't breathe. My first instinct was to demand answers, but something about his calm, steady stare made me freeze. He didn't explain how he knew me or why he had that photo. He just finished his drink, left some cash on the bar, and walked out. I followed him into the parking lot, but he was gone. Just gone, like he'd vanished into the night. I stood there under the flickering streetlight, clutching the photograph, feeling like the universe was mocking me all over again. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. "Not for the reason you think." What did that mean? Why would she be looking for me after I disappeared? A part of me wanted to burn the photo, to throw it away and forget, but I couldn't. I started carrying it in my pocket like some cursed charm, as if it held answers I wasn't ready to face. I told myself I didn't care anymore, but I was lying. That one night, that one photograph, cracked open everything I had been trying to bury. And I had this feeling, this terrible, gnawing feeling, that whatever she was going to tell me would hurt worse than the betrayal itself. I tried to ignore it, I really did. For days, I kept telling myself that the photo didn't mean anything, that it was probably some sick coincidence or maybe just a cruel trick. But every time I pulled it out of my pocket and stared at her face, I could see something that wasn't guilt or shame, but fear. Fear of what? Of me? Of the man in the photo? Of something worse? I couldn't tell, but the longer I looked, the more I realized that I couldn't just keep drifting. Whether I liked it or not, my past was calling me back. The first step was figuring out who that stranger was, the man who handed me the photo. I asked around in the bar where I met him, but no one knew him. It was like he had appeared out of nowhere and disappeared into nothing. One of the bartenders, a guy with a tattoo of a snake coiling around his neck, told me, "People like him? They show up when someone's life is about to get turned upside down." I laughed it off, but deep down, I knew he was right. I decided to head back toward the last place I saw her. Not home, not the house we used to share. I couldn't face that yet. But I remembered something strange from the receipt I found months ago, the one that proved her betrayal. It had the name of that fancy hotel, and I still had it tucked inside my glove compartment, as if I knew one day I'd need it. So I drove there, all night, through rain and endless highways, with nothing but the sound of my tires on wet asphalt to keep me company. When I arrived, the place looked like a palace compared to the motels I'd been staying in. I felt like I didn't belong there, like I was just some broken man trespassing on a world I'd never understand. I asked the receptionist if a woman named Lillian had stayed there in the past year. Of course, they couldn't give me information. But then something strange happened. Just as I was about to leave, the receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, leaned forward and whispered, "Are you Eli? Someone left this for you." She handed me an envelope. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it was for me. Inside was a single key, room 204, and a note that said, "You need to see for yourself before it's too late." My hands trembled as I held it. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. How could someone know I'd show up here? My mind was a storm of questions, but I took the key anyway. Room 204 was at the end of a long hallway, the kind that feels like it stretches forever. When I opened the door, the first thing I noticed was the smell, faint perfume mixed with something metallic, like blood. My heart started pounding. There was no one inside, but the room was a mess. Drawers open, curtains half torn down, and on the nightstand, another photograph. This one nearly made me drop to my knees. It was me. Not a recent picture, but one taken before I disappeared. I was standing in front of our old house, smiling like a fool, completely unaware of what was coming. On the back, in her handwriting, were 3 words, "Find the truth." At that moment, I knew I wasn't just running from her anymore. Something bigger was happening. Something I didn't understand. And for the first time in months, I felt fear, not just heartbreak, real, bone-deep fear. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed in room 204 with that photograph in my hand, staring at my own face from a life I no longer recognized. Every shadow in that room felt alive. Every creak of the floorboards outside the door made my skin crawl. I didn't know if I was being followed, hunted, or just losing my mind. Maybe it was all three. I kept thinking about the man in the bar and his words. She's looking for you, but not for the reason you think. It haunted me more than the betrayal itself. When the sun came up, I walked out of that hotel with a plan, or at least the closest thing I'd had to a plan in months. The note said, "Find the truth." Fine, I'd find it, but I had no idea where to start. I didn't even know if Lillian left that message, or if this was some elaborate game meant to pull me back into her orbit. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about her cheating anymore. Something darker was hiding underneath all of this. I started retracing steps I never wanted to take. I went back to the town I'd abandoned, the one I swore I'd never see again. Driving past familiar streets felt like reopening a wound that had never healed. Our old house looked the same, but it felt empty, like a stage after the actors have all left. The curtains were drawn tight, and there was a mailbox overflowing with letters. Against my better judgment, I went up to the door. There was no answer. But on the porch, taped to the wooden railing, was another envelope with my name scrawled in sharp, frantic handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with an address on it, a place about an hour outside of town. No explanation, no note, nothing, just an address. I stared at it, debating whether I should go or burn it and drive away forever. But something in me, maybe anger, maybe desperation, pushed me into my car. The address led me to an abandoned farmhouse, the kind that looks like it's hiding stories no one should ever uncover. The windows were boarded, the paint was peeling, and the whole place seemed to sag under the weight of its own history. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt colder, heavier, like even the wind was warning me to leave. I should have listened. Inside, the floorboards groaned with every step, and the smell of mold and dust clawed at my throat. On the kitchen table, there was a box. Just a plain, unmarked box. I opened it, and inside were photos, dozens of them. Pictures of me. Not just recent ones, but old ones, from years ago, some I didn't even remember being taken. My heart hammered in my chest as I shuffled through them. At the bottom of the pile, there was one that froze me in place. It was a picture of Lillian, standing next to the same man I'd caught her with. But this time they weren't smiling. They looked terrified. On the back of that photo was a single line written in a shaky hand. "He's not who you think." That was the moment I realized I had no idea who I was really up against, or why I was being dragged into this twisted mess. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. This was something darker, something I wasn't ready to face. But I knew I had no choice. I sat there in that abandoned farmhouse for what felt like hours, staring at the photos until my hands started shaking. They weren't just random snapshots. They were organized, almost like a timeline of my life. Me at work, me at a gas station, me eating alone at a diner miles from home. Someone had been watching me for a long time. My mind couldn't wrap around it. Why? Who would go to such lengths to track a man who had already disappeared from everything and everyone? The worst part was the photo of Lillian. Her face wasn't the same as the woman I once knew. There was no warmth, no fake smile like when I caught her with him. Only fear, pure fear, like she had seen something that changed her. I flipped the photo over again, reading the words, "He's not who you think." My brain kept trying to piece together what that meant. Not who I think. I thought he was just the guy she cheated with, the one who shattered my life. But now, looking at their faces, I wasn't sure anymore. Something else was going on. Something I couldn't explain. I decided I couldn't sit in that farmhouse another second. I stuffed the photos into my jacket and got the hell out of there. As I drove back toward the highway, I kept checking my rearview mirror, paranoid that someone was following me. Every passing car felt like a threat. I hadn't felt fear like this since the night I left her. It was different now. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was survival. I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't get them on my own. There was only one person I could think of, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had been there for me before my life fell apart. His name was Vincent, and he wasn't the kind of guy who asked too many questions. He had always been the guy who knew people, Someone you called when you needed to dig up dirt or make someone talk. I hadn't called him since the wedding. I wasn't even sure he'd pick up, but when I finally reached him, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he'd been expecting my call. "Eli," he said, "you sound like a man who just crawled out of hell. What happened?" I told him everything. The photos, the strange man in the bar, the farmhouse. I even told him about Lillian, though saying her name felt like pressing on an open wound. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then he said something that sent chills down my spine. "If those photos exist, it's already too late. Whoever's watching you, they want you to know they're watching." I wanted to argue, but his tone told me he wasn't guessing. He knew something I didn't. Vincent agreed to meet me in a motel just outside the state line. He told me to bring the photos, but nothing else. No phone, no laptop, nothing that could be traced. I agreed, though every part of me screamed that I was stepping into something I wouldn't be able to walk out of. On the drive there, I kept replaying the last night I saw Lillian, the moment I walked away. I always thought that was the end of our story, but now I wasn't so sure. What if her betrayal was just the beginning of something bigger, something that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival? By the time I pulled into the parking lot of the motel where Vincent was waiting, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know if I was about to find the truth, or if I was walking into something much worse. Vincent was waiting outside his truck when I arrived, leaning against the hood like he had all the time in the world. He was the same as I remembered, sharp eyes, hair that looked like it had seen more sleepless nights than combs, and that expression that made you feel like he already knew everything before you even opened your mouth. I walked over with the photos clutched in my hand, my nerves shot to pieces. He didn't say a word at first, just took the envelope from me and flipped through the pictures one by one. The longer he looked, the darker his face became. "This isn't random," Vincent finally said, his voice low and steady. "This is organized surveillance. Someone has been documenting your every move for at least a year. And it's not just about you." He pulled out the photo of Lillian and tapped it with his finger. "You see that man? I know who he is." I felt my stomach drop. "Who is he?" I asked, almost whispering, like the answer itself would cut me open. Vincent's jaw tightened. "His name is Carson Hale. He's not just some guy. He used to work for a private security contractor, the kind that doesn't care about laws, only about money and leverage. If Lillian's with him, either by choice or by force, this whole thing is bigger than just an affair." I wanted to laugh, to tell Vincent he was crazy, but deep down, something about this made a terrible kind of sense. The look on Lillian's face in that photo wasn't the face of someone happy with her choices. It was the look of someone trapped, someone who had seen something she couldn't unsee. I thought back to the man in the bar, to his cryptic warning, and suddenly it all started to connect in ways I didn't want to believe. Vincent motioned for me to follow him inside the motel room he had rented. On the table, he had a laptop, maps, and a small stack of files. "I've been keeping tabs on a few people I thought you should know about," he said, flipping open one of the folders. My name was on the first page. My entire life, where I worked, where I stayed during those months I disappeared, every motel receipt I thought I'd paid in secret, was listed in cold, clinical detail. My blood ran cold. "How the hell did you get this?" I demanded. Vincent didn't flinch. "I didn't. This was sent to me 2 weeks ago. No return address. No explanation. Someone wanted me to have this before you even called me." He looked at me with an expression that was half concern, half warning. "Eli, I don't think Lillian's betrayal was the real story here. I think you were supposed to see it, supposed to leave. Someone wanted you out of the picture." The room felt smaller with every word he said, like the walls were closing in. I sat down, my head spinning, trying to piece together what this all meant. If Vincent was right, everything I thought I knew about that night was wrong. It wasn't just her cheating. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was something deliberate, something orchestrated. Then Vincent pulled out the last piece of the puzzle, or at least, the piece that made my heart stop. It was another photograph, but this one wasn't of Lillian or me. It was of Vincent himself, sitting in the same bar where I'd met the stranger. On the back was a single line in handwriting I recognized instantly. "You can't trust anyone, not even him." I stared at Vincent, my pulse thundering in my ears. Was this another mind game? Was someone trying to turn me against the only person who seemed to be helping me? Or was I being played again, just like with Lillian? I didn't have an answer, but I could feel that something was about to break. either me or the truth. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at Vincent like I was seeing him for the first time. The photo in my hand felt like a loaded weapon, every word on its back tearing at my trust. I wanted to believe he was on my side. I wanted to believe someone was. He noticed my hesitation and leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Eli, whoever is behind this wants you isolated. They want you paranoid. Don't give them that power. If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't be sitting here showing you everything I know. I looked at him, trying to find a hint of deception, but I couldn't. And then I realized, this entire time, I'd been living in shadows, doubting everyone, even myself. Maybe it was time to stop running and start finding real answers. Vincent must have sensed my decision because he slid the folder across the table. I can help you, but you have to face her. Lillian has answers you need, even if they hurt. Are you ready? The next day, we drove out to a quiet cabin on the outskirts of a small town. It was where Vincent said Lillian had been staying, hiding, apparently, from Carson Hale. As soon as I saw her, my heart stopped. She looked thinner, her face pale, like she hadn't slept in weeks. When our eyes met, she broke down crying. Not the kind of tears that come from guilt, but the kind that come from being crushed by something bigger than both of us. Eli, she said, her voice trembling. You don't understand what happened that night. It wasn't what you think. I did something to protect you. Carson wasn't. He wasn't just someone I was seeing. He was threatening me, threatening us. I thought if I played along, if I made you leave, he'd let you go. But he didn't. He's been following you, watching you. I'm so sorry. Her words hit me like a storm. I wanted to be angry, to yell at her for all the pain, but instead, all I felt was a strange, heavy relief. For the first time in a year, I understood that I hadn't just been abandoned. I'd been pushed out to keep me safe. Vincent confirmed everything. Carson was being investigated for blackmailing families, digging into people's private lives to extort them. I had just been another name on his list, but Lillian had tried to draw his attention away from me, even at the cost of our marriage. The three of us sat in that cabin, going through every detail, every photograph. By the time the sun set, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Lillian wasn't the villain in my story. She was the broken hero I didn't see coming. We agreed to go to the authorities, to end Carson's twisted game once and for all. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. A week later, Carson was arrested thanks to the evidence Vincent had gathered. It felt surreal watching it all unfold, like the shadow that had been stalking me for so long was finally lifted. Lillian and I didn't rush back into what we had before. We were careful, cautious, rebuilding piece by piece. But when she smiled at me again, really smiled, I realized that love, real love, can survive even the darkest storms if you're both willing to face the truth. Now, a year later, I'm not the ghost I used to be. I'm alive again. We both are. And every time I look at her, I know this. Sometimes the worst things in life are just the beginning of something better, something stronger.